friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Feed the Birds stamp set. So I've stamped my images out with Lawn Fawn jet black ink on some Spectrum Noir premium white cardstock, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my little girl's skin, and it's really just her face that it's showing because she's wearing mittens and pants in the scene that I'm going to be coloring. So I used E000, E00, and E11, laid in a shadow with the E11 under her hairline and also on the bridge of her nose, blended that out with the E00, and then finished with the E000, and I did do a second layer of the darkest two shades. And then I'm going to grab in a little RV10 for some rosy cheeks. I laid that in initially, and then I'm going to add a little RV11 over top. Then I'll go back with my RV10 just around the edges to kind of soften that into the rest of the skin tone. For her hair, I'm going to use E50, E51, and E53 to start. And there's not a lot showing there, which actually makes it a little more complicated because in order to get a nice natural look, you've still got to be able to have, the highlights and the lowlights in there. So I started with my E50, and I'm just using the very tip of my marker so I can try to squeeze all three of those shades in. Darkened it up a bit with the E51, and then even further with the E53, and then I blended back down in the reverse. I still wasn't quite happy with that, didn't have enough dimension, so I decided to pull in the E44 just to darken things up and give her a bit more of those low lights. It's got a lot of gray tone in there, so it's kind of a duller color. It's going to kind of combat some of the brassiness of the E50s. So I just went back down in the reverse once again, and I was much happier with the way that that looked. So I'm going to move on to my little tree branch, and for that I'm using E23, E25, and E27, laying in a tiny bit of shadow with that E27. Even on the little branches, I'm still going to try to squeeze in all those shades there and blend up towards the top with the E25 and then the E23 for the highlight. For the pine boughs, I'm going to use G94 and G99. Again, I don't want to get too heavy-handed, so I'm using the very, very tip of that marker and very light pressure to just lay in a little bit of that color with the G99 so I have some depth, and then blending that out with the G94 in the exact same way, just so I have a little bit of color on there. Next, I'm moving on to her coat, and I decided to go with kind of a nice grayish wool coat. So I'm using E70, E71, and E74, starting with the E74 and laying in my shadows. So anywhere that would be not getting in the light, so the underside of her arms, also any place that would be casting a shadow, so underneath her scarf, along the sides of her body, under the other arm, where the cuff would be creating a little bit of a shadow because it's kind of folded over, and anything like that. And then once I have that laid in, I'll come in with the E71 and begin to blend that out. Now, I wasn't sure how dark I wanted to go with this, so I decided to start with this lighter compo, but I am going to decide to end up darkening this up a bit, which we'll get to in a little bit. So before I do that, though, I'm going to blend out with the E70 as my highlight shade, just softening those edges and kind of creating a nice smooth blend. And then, like I said, I'm going to darken things up once I saw how that was going to look. There just wasn't enough contrast for me. I like a lot of contrast in my coloring. So I'm going to add in the E77, and I'm going to go back in and lay in those shadows once again. And I decided to leave that in because I thought it would be nice for you guys to see what a difference just one more extra marker can make. So especially if it's one like this that has a lot of depth to it. So I'm going to go in and deepen up those shadows, and I know they look kind of funny right now because compared to the lighter colors, it is, quite a bit darker. But once we get everything blended out, I'm coming in now with that E74, which was originally my darkest. Now it's going to be one of my midtones, and just starting to blend that out. And you can see already that it's adding much more dimension than was there with the first pass. So I often will do a second layer of coloring anyway, especially on larger objects and darker objects. And so instead of doing 2 full layers with that E77 added in, I'm going to count that first layer that I did as one of the layers, and I'm just going to count this one as my second layer. So I'm just coming back in and finishing blending all of that out, and I like that much better. So I'm going to give her a little hat to match. This time I'm going to jump straight in with that E77 because I know that, I want it to match the coat. So I laid a nice shadow right up above that band because I wanted there to have like a crease there in the fabric and also look like the top part is kind of a little bit looser and kind of ballooning out, so it would have a nice shadow there. I'm going to keep the shadows toward the back of her head. I'm going to have kind of a central light source on today's card. I want to keep the light on her face, and she's facing toward the right. All of her shadows are going to be down on her back on the left hand side. So I just blend it up with the remaining colors, and then I'm going to move on to her little boots. I decided to make those brown as well, and I didn't want to come in with like a different brown combo. I wanted it to kind of match, but I'm going to be a lot more heavy-handed with that E77 because I wanted them to be a bit darker. I don't want them to look like they're made of the same fabric as the coat and hat. So I was a little bit more heavy-handed, but I'm also going to add in the E79 just to darken things up even further and just make it clear that it's, something different. They match, but they're not the same material. So I laid in those shadows again. I put a little bit of darkness where the crease is between the toe and the top part. And then I'm leaving a little bit of highlight on the very tip of the toe because that's where the sun would hit the most. I also decided to do the piping detail on the edges of her coat with the same combo as the boots. So I started with that E79 and then I'm blending that out a bit with the E77, and I'll save a little bit of room for the E74. And then I realized that there would be a shadow up under her hand, so I'm going to come back in with that E77 and just pull a little bit more darkness down underneath that and blend that out once again. Alright, so I've got a lot of neutrals going on this card so far, so now I want to start to add in some color. And I'm going to start with this pink combo, R11, R20, and R22. I'm using that R22 to create some creases in the fabric on either side of her neck, on her scarf, and then also down the back side of her, also adding that shadow that the coat would cast against it. So then I'm going to pull that color out a bit more with the R20 and fill in any of that white space with the R11. I am going to go over that again with a second layer because I just want there to be a bit more depth in those little creases. So I'm going to go back in with that R22 and kind of add back in the little shadows that kind of got blended out a bit. And then just with a lighter hand, go over the R20 on the edges and kind of smooth things out. And then I'll add a tiny bit of that R11 in just a few little places. And I will add more detail to that later, but it has to fully dry. So I'm going to move on to her mittens. And again, I'm using that R22 to add some shading on the bottom edge and then a little bit to separate out the thumb. And then blending out with the R20 and the R11. And I did do a second layer on those as well, just so the saturation would be on the same level as it is on the scarf. So at this point, I was still trying to figure out what color I wanted my birds to be, but I decided to give them a little red breast, so I'm going to use these same shades. I actually started with the R20 first because I wasn't sure how dark I wanted to go. I blended that out with the R11, and then I decided to darken it up, so I added a bit of R22 on my second layer. I decided to make her pants be blue jeans, so I pulled out my favorite combo for jeans, which is B93, B95, and B97. I'm going to put a little bit of shadow up under her coat and then also down the backs of her legs and also accentuate her little knees. So drew those in, blended out with the B95, and then I'm going to blend that out with the B93. I decided to add in the B91 above the knee just to make them really look worn out like jeans get, in that area, because that's the most flexible part of the jeans, because they were, it gets bent a lot with the movements of the body. So keeping that area light, I think, just helps it look a little bit more realistic. And then I decided to add in some yellows on the birds' faces. So I chose Y11, Y13, and Y15. I started with the Y15 and made sure to go over the edge of the R22 on the breast to just kind of create a transition. It's a little bit more of a peachy shade, and then blend it out with the other two shades. I also colored in her button with the yellow, but later I'm going to change that. And then I decided to do bluebirds, but I didn't want to do like a blue that was anywhere near her blue jeans. I'm trying to match some pattern paper, and the blues in the pattern paper are really more of like an indigo. So I'm playing with this combo. It's not a combo that I think I've ever used before, but it's BV02, BV13, and BV17. It also kind of reminds me of purple martins because those were my grandpa's favorite birds. My great-grandpa actually used to build houses for purple martins, and he just really loved them. So it kind of made me remember him. So that was kind of special as I was coloring these with this combo. And I don't even know if purple martins look like this. They probably don't, but just coloring with these purple combos or indigo combos kind of made me think of him. So I used the BV quadruple 0 to go over the yellow on the face just a little bit and soften it up. I felt like the yellow was a little bit too vibrant. I kind of wish that I had started with the E13 and done a little bit lighter. But to kind of help with that, I just decided to go over it with that BV quadruple 0 and just kind of make it match a little bit more with those kind of blue-violet shades. Like I said, I was trying to match these to the pattern paper, and I think on their own they look maybe just a bit too colorful, but once they get in the context of the pattern paper, I do think it pulls the card together. So I used YR27 to color in their beaks, and I did go over the button on her jacket as well to kind of make it like a copper button. And then I'm going to use the R22 now to add some detail into her scarf. I'm going to do a plaid pattern similar to the one that I did when I colored the girl and the snowman from My Snowman, which is another Hello Bluebird set. So basically what I'm doing is doing one stripe and then two stripes, and then skipping between one stripe and then two stripes, and then switching the direction that I'm going, and that kind of creates a nice little plaid pattern. I'm going to grab my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and kind of just scribble it off to the side because it gets kind of gunky on the tip between uses. And then I'll go over the eyes of all of the little images there to brighten them up, make them nice and shiny again. And then I'm going to use a white gel pen to add more stripes and details onto that scarf using the same pattern, but I'm not like going exactly over the pink lines that I did. I'm just kind of doing it randomly over top. And then because I drew a little bit outside of the lines with that white gel pen and kind of covered up some of the black lines, I'm going to grab a black Memento marker which is very similar to the ink that I used to stamp the image, and just kind of color over those white lines a bit. And then I'll trim these out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I've trimmed out 2 pieces of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock with the Lawn Fawn Stitch Circle Stackables and the Lawn Fawn Stitch Hillside borders. I'm going to start with the main circle, and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide ink in Spun Sugar. I'm going to come in from the sides and blend toward the center, and I'm being pretty heavy-handed because this is such a pale color that it takes a bit of ink to get it to actually show up, especially on this coated surface of the Bristol cardstock. So I'm happy with that. Now I want to add in some squeezed lemonade. I'm trying to create a sunrise scene. So I want a little bit of what looks like the sun coming up from the bottom and kind of blending into that pale pink sky. So I'm going to blend, I'm not worried about the very bottom because the snowbank is going to be covering that up, but just where I think the sun will be, and then I'm going to blend over that transition with the spun sugar once again, and then I'll go back to my squeezed lemonade. I'm going to test it in here and see if there's enough of that sunrise showing. I wanted just a little bit more, so I added that. Then I cleaned off my mini media mat, and now I'm going to add in some shaded lilac on the top of my snowbank. I'm just starting with this shade because, again, the blue that's in that pattern paper is more of that indigo shade, and I didn't have like a pale indigo in Distress Oxides. So I used the shaded lilac first, and then I went over that with some tumbled glass to kind of create my own pale indigo color. Once I like the way those are looking, I'm going to glue them together. So I'm just using a little liquid glue on the bottom of that, and then I'm just going to add that over top right where I want it, so it looks like the sun is kind of rising over that snowbank. Then I'm going to pop it into my MISTI and stamp my sentiment and also a few of those little bird seeds. Now, because this is Distress Oxide ink, a lot of times these dye inks will not go over top, and it just was not working. I used this ink because I wanted to color in the bird seed, but it just wasn't going to work. So I had to switch to some VersaFine Onyx Black because that is like a pigment ink. It's nice and thick, and it sits on top of the surface, so you can see that I got a much better impression. I stamped that down twice to make sure that it was nice and bold, and then I'm going to set this off to the side to dry because it is going to take a little while. It will smear if you accidentally touch it right now. So now I'm going to stamp on the inside. I'm using some Lawn Fawn Ballet Slippers cardstock for my card base and stamping in bubblegum ink. I'm using the sentiment that says, "Thank you for your kindness," as well as 2 more of the little birds and some more bird seed. And then I'm going to clean those off, and I wanted to try to use another one of the bird seed images in the center because it just looked too empty there, but none of them were really going to fit. It kind of just looked too big. There was no way to it kind of made it look like it was up in the air. So I'm going to use that same stamp with just the 2, but I'm going to reposition it in a new way and stamp that again. So it just kind of fills in that space a bit more, makes it look a little bit more even. So now I'm ready for my pattern papers. I'm using the Simple Stories Cozy Days pattern paper. I'm going to flip through and try to pull out some patterns that I like. This floral print is what I had used to do my coloring. So I really liked this kind of gray and white plaid. I thought that went really well with the jacket, but I wasn't 100% sold on it, so I just went along and held that pattern up to some different plaids and different things that might be good for a background, and I wasn't really in love with any of them, to be honest. I wanted to use the gray and white plaid, but I didn't like the way that the floral laid on it by itself. It kind of needed something to break up those 2 prints. So that's what I was looking for, and I ended up deciding to go with this kind of maroon with the pink little stripe. I thought maybe that would help transition between the floral and the plaid. I ended up changing my mind again though. Once I had the patterns all cut down and laid out together, the maroon shade was just, it didn't pull in any of the coloring. The focal panel was very soft. So I ended up using this little pink polka dot instead. I trimmed that down with the Lawn Fawn stitched scalloped borders, and I thought that that pink just pulled in that pink sky on the focal panel. And because I'm adding this little scallop on either side of the floral print, it breaks up, you know, that kind of jarring transition from the floral to the plaid that was bothering me. So it just kind of like eases in and, you know, creates a nice, almost like the blend with Copic coloring. It just kind of like eases into the next pattern. So I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of that. I'm going to adhere it to that plaid print. And I'm just trying to make sure that the white that is showing above the scallop is also the same amount that's showing below the scallop. And then I'm going to take the Lawn Fawn large stitch rectangle stackables and die cut that whole panel so that the stitching detail matches up the entire way around. And then I'll add some more liquid glue to the back of that and adhere that to my card front. That's going to cover my card front completely and create a nice bold background. To give my focal panel a little bit of lift, I've added some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back. So I'm going to peel off those release papers and then just line that up in the center of that floral. So it also helps because that floral is so bold, but having that nice soft color in the center kind of tones it down because you only have the floral that's showing on the outside edges. So I'm going to color the little bird seed with the YR27 and then the YR23, and then I'm going to pull in my images. So I wanted to get this branch lined up the way I wanted it because I needed to trim that down to fit the edge of that circle. So I grabbed a pencil and I'm just drawing on where the edge of that circle would be so that I can trim that down so it's going to fit flush where I want it. So I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of that using my favorite Tombow Mono Multi Glue. And then I will line that up with the edge and have that tree branch be right above that sentiment, which was really where I wanted it to be so it would highlight that sentiment. Then I'm going to add my little girl, since she is the largest image. I really want to have her placed on the scene and have her be at the right level to be kind of looking up at the bluebird that will be sitting on that branch. And so I'm going to just tuck its feet kind of back behind the branch so that it can be sitting there and kind of looking down and interacting with her. And then I'll take the other little bird and I'm going to put that down below. He's also looking up and kind of in front of that bird seed. To finish up the card, I'm going to add some crystal stickles. I'm not going to add too much because there's not that many places that I wanted to have it because I can't put it on her scarf because of that white gel pen. It would just melt it away. So I put it on the tree branches and the top edge of the snow so they could all be kind of sparkly with frost. And then I also grabbed my colorless blender and tried to clean up a little bit of ink that went out of the lines when I was coloring in that bird seed. And that is going to complete my card for today. So there is a look at all of that sparkle and shine and another peek at the inside. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I absolutely loved playing with this stamp set and I cannot wait to use it again and do the other little girl in the set. So if you would like to see that, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of the products I used today, you'll find them listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye-bye.